Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, episode number 129. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me, our customary in-house analyst and Vikings blogger extraordinaire, generally all-around useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. I know we talk about this every so often, but it's really hard to believe we made it to 129 episodes. That's nuts to me.
I know, It is a never-ending marvel to me that we have, I guess, managed to keep it together this long. But, the more I do the show and the more I see the support of our listenership, the more I'm starting to realize that this might be a life sentence. We may be proud of ourselves for getting to 129, but we're, roped into, 1,000 and beyond. You know that, right?
I think as soon as you hit episode 116, you're in for the next 900.
Well, that's 116, really?
Yeah, I think that's the rule.
Well, going by actual episodes we have released, we passed that a long time ago. So
that's true.
We've come so far that we have two divergent timelines of episode numbers. That's where we're at. And actually, I think of it in the sense of Star Trek The Next Generation started to get really good in that transition between the third and fourth season. We're basically in the downtime between the Best of Both Worlds episodes. Captain Picard is still on the Borg ship right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, people should definitely listen for that.
Exactly. That means that it's only going to get, better and more intense in the years to come. We have an awesome guest this week. But before we get to the interview, we have some exciting news on the listener support front. Some new donors this week. Andrew Fraser adds his name to the Norse Code Associate Producer list by donating at the $10 a month level on Patreon. Wow, thanks, buddy. And it's great because he refers to himself on Patreon as Jay-Z Jacket, and he writes with his contribution, "Hello, my dream is to be mentioned more than Jay-Z Hoodie. Maybe I will start said dream next week. Until then, Skull."
All right, Jay-Z Jacket. I think you're well on your way this week.
It is on like Donkey Kong. So thank you to Andrew and also by extension Ben for blazing a trail in the amount of money that people are willing to commit to making this show even better. Also, Corey, there's no last name included with the Patreon account, so I can't be more specific than that. But Corey increased their Patreon pledge from $2 a month to $5 a month. Thank you so much. It's ever so kind. We love it when people contribute via Patreon. It enables us to more accurately predict our income and kind of fine-tune our expenses to fit. And, there are myriad little unexpected expenses with operating a podcast. But, you guys contribute so much money, it allows us to do things like buy Arif all the draft guides and set him up for training camp with potentially some new equipment. Maybe we won't have to fight the hotel Wi-Fi demons this year.
It's true.
Another contributor this week, Brett Culpepper of Marion, Iowa, sends us $20 via the PayPal, which is an entirely acceptable method if you just feel like giving us a little chump change one time. I mean, not that $20 is chump change. It's far more than that. But if you desire to make a one-time donation, you can do that by going to paypal.me/NorseCode. Of course, our Patreon page is patreon.com/NorseCode. And any contribution you choose to make will be greatly appreciated and goes towards continuing our life sentence without Norse Code parole. Final note before we get into the interview, Google Play Music has finally released their podcast aggregator. So now you can stream or I guess otherwise listen to Norse Code on Google Play Music. So be sure to check that out if you are a Google Play Music enthusiast. I personally am a huge Android enthusiast, and I don't know anyone that uses Google Play Music. So take that for what it's worth.
Way to draw up support, Dusty.
Hey man, it's just look, we're on all the fine podcast aggregators, and our RSS feed is relatively easy to remember, so it's not that critical to me that people listen on Google Play Music. We don't get any more money for it or anything. I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, fair enough.
On with the show. Joining us this week, formerly of Football Outsiders, occasional contributor to Football Guys, but most known for his Twitter presence and the eponymous website and YouTube channels. Well, I guess not completely eponymous. Matt Waldman is here. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well, Dusty. How are you doing?
Well, man, I found $5 on the ground today. So
Man, that's pretty sweet.
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I'm doing great. Anyway, MattWaldmanRSP.com is your primary project now, correct?
It is. It's honestly been my primary project for about the past 11 years. And I would say it's a co-project with that and Football Guys. That's where I've been writing for quite a long time for both of those places. So those are my gigs.
Awesome. Well, we're super stoked to have you on. Your website and your YouTube channel are focused primarily on, I mean, it's basically a film room for rookie prospects, right? Like you focus on that year and that process as players are entering the draft and do like really, deep level breakdowns of players, right?
Absolutely. That's really the design. I mean, the blog is more of a way for me to just show people what my process is about and how I study the game. And sometimes I'll study pro players, just to show people kind of what I'm looking at from that standpoint. I watch a lot of pro football and I write also, fantasy football as well, but I watch a lot of pro football because it's very important to me that you're looking through a NFL lens when you're projecting players and studying players at the college level. So I'll do a variety of things on the site that's really focused on just helping people to understand the game a little bit more, maybe do some things in a non-conventional standpoint to just kind of talk about combining a variety of factors into evaluation, and then occasionally doing some group-oriented projects that are more just from the standpoint of the love of the game.
Awesome. Well,
so you mentioned process a lot. You mention it on a lot of your film room stuff. You mention it on Twitter, and of course, you mentioned it at the beginning of your RSP, your rookie scouting portfolio, which we've mentioned on the show multiple times is a phenomenal piece of work that our listeners should absolutely look into if they're interested in evaluation in general, and of course individual skill players. But this focus on process, it's somewhat newish for draft Twitter and for conventional NFL analysis, but it's been your focus for the way that we discuss the draft for a really, really long time. Where does that focus on process come from?
Yeah, and first of all, Arif, it's nice to finally get a chance to chat with you, actually on voice to voice as opposed to just using Twitter. But and I appreciate you guys mentioning the RSP. It's obviously a project that I've been doing for a while now, and the process-oriented approach really came from my former career, and I spent about 15 years as an operations manager, and also learned about quality processes during that time, and ended up getting certified in a process to really focus on certification for operations management and quality processes in this past job. And really, and at that time, I was really focused on monitoring performance. And it was something that while I was, I was a freelance writer in the past and had still been doing that somewhat throughout the years, even though I wasn't writing about football until, the latter part of my past career. And I just thought one day that it would be kind of cool to apply some of what I had learned in my day job into monitoring performance for football players. And to me, I talk a lot about process because to me it's important that the way that you monitor or watch the way people perform and observe that and evaluate it, you need to have something that's pretty set in stone, at least from the standpoint of something that's structured. And having that structure helps you not only keep track of what you're doing, but also kind of helps you not have to, because you're able to keep track of what you're doing, it gives you kind of some freedom to explore some different things that you see. You're not trying to juggle so many things in your memory of what to look for. You kind of have a reference to look at. And then at the same time, having a process that's written down and that's structured also gives you opportunity to evaluate that process based on what you're seeing when you're studying players, and help that structure evolve and grow so that you get better at what you're doing. Because otherwise, I find that when you're evaluating talent, one of the biggest dangers that you can have is that you end up taking the opinion of other people to the point where you're acquiring their opinion, but you're not acquiring their thought process. You're not really understanding what went on behind that thought to really see whether that makes sense for what you're doing. Because everybody's standpoint of how they evaluate talent, it's a mental process. When you look at process in general, you want to make sure that teams of people, no matter who you're evaluating or what you're evaluating, that everyone's on the same page with what you're doing. Now, I'm a team of one with what I do, but I managed several teams of staff in jobs where you needed to have a very well-defined process that had some room for growth in it. And when I looked at teams in the NFL, I noticed that oftentimes you look at these grades that they post, and there are these round grades, or there are grades that have this scale. But when I look at the scale made no sense whatsoever. I mean, there's when you say a 7.1 through a 7.9 equals a starter or an all-pro or something like that, that's such a general, vague term for what they mean. And it doesn't even have any definition for what that means at each position. So for me, process was very important. And that's where I came from when I started doing this, is that I had more of an expertise in developing really best practice processes. And I recognized that the NFL really lacked that. It was something that they don't really have at all, because if you get guys in a room and you ask them to define what a Pro Bowl player is at a position, you're probably going to get 4 or 5 different answers based on the variety of experiences that each of these guys have, their knowledge of the position, what they were taught by their elders or in their past careers. So it's one of those deals where the more variation you have with that, then the more likely you're going to have errors with your process, and it's going to create issues with the decisions that you make as a team.
So this was a situation where, and it seems like some NFL war rooms still do this, but a lot of NFL teams maybe have moved past this. But this seems like a situation where you'd gather a bunch of people, most of them pretty smart, in a room, and remove a lot of the advantages you have by having a lot of smart people by basically asking them, hey, is he good? Is he very good? Is he great? And basically leaving the question there and then just slapping a number on it at the end. That's kind of what it sounds like.
That's exactly what it sounds like. I mean, I think a lot of your listeners are in corporate America or have worked in any type of environment that's even if it's not a complete straight up corporate gig where they do evaluations, and the evaluations are like 1 through 7 grades. And they, and if you've ever been a supervisor or a manager, they go, all right, here's the deal. No one gets a 1 unless you're going to fire them, or below that. No one's going to get a 6 or a 7 unless the upper management, of the company, the regional manager or the VP or the president of the company is going to allow you to give that score. So you have this middle range there of what you're going to slap on there as a score. And NFL grades look very much like that corporate grading system that's really flawed, because you're not allowed to use a full range of grading, and no one really knows what those grades mean. And it's something that you have to feel your way out through, because there's not a lot of training with it. And so again, there's tons of intelligent people in the NFL, tons of skilled minds with it when it comes to understanding the game of football. But when it comes to managing the minds, when it comes to putting things in place that are going to create processes that last throughout the for the long term and help your organization grow and get people on the same page, the league is too busy firing people every 3 years and not having any patience with anything, because it's a top-down managed system where you have owners who can be impatient, who can be kind of impetuous about how they look at things, and who may not have, honestly, great business experience beyond what they inherited in their lives that allowed them to make enough money to do this. And yeah, we often characterize some of these guys as great businessmen, and some of them were in one industry, but doesn't mean that they were actually great managers. They had maybe.
So this is actually a really interesting question to me, because it seems like some of the best owners in the NFL, or at one time some of the best owners in the NFL, are people whose primary business seems to have been, or who've made money mostly in football. So Al Davis, before like the end of his career, I mean, he was a football guy through and through. Jerry Jones, obviously, he made money in a lot of different ways, but I mean, he played football at Arkansas. You know, the Rooneys and the Maras. I mean, they seem to make a lot of their money through football and not through a lot of these other business ventures. Some of these other football owners that we don't like as much, and obviously Paul Allen at Seattle's a little bit excluded, but some of these other owners, you know, Dan Snyder, for example, made a lot of his money outside of football, and then he bought a team. You know, it seems kind of weird that, you know, these people that you'd expect to, because they have outside business experience, would be better, or at least introduce a more process-oriented approach to football. Why do you think that difference is? Why do you think that the owners that seem to have grown up around football, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just pulling anecdotes out of the air, but why does it seem to be, at least to me, that the owners who grew up around football seem to be a little bit more stable and better owners in the NFL? And I know I just called Jerry Jones a good owner, but it seems like more like that now than it did a couple years ago.
Yeah, it seems like he's kind of gotten the hang of things a little bit, knowing his strengths and weaknesses to an extent, or at least he's gotten a little bit stronger in certain areas where people saw him as really a liability. But I think that really what it comes down to is that the guys who grew up with the league, I think that there's part of it there that they grew up in the league and they had multiple roles. And that kind of matches the system that the NFL has always tried to foster, which is, you know, you were a player, and even if you didn't make it in the NFL, then maybe you wanted to continue in football. You had at least a foot in the door to become a coach, and you worked your way up to become a coach at some level. And then coaches worked their way up on some level to become, you know, it's kind of like the George Halas model. You know, George Halas is kind of the footprint for what you're talking about when you think about the history of the game. So that to me is, you know, or Tom Landry was a good example of that. Vince Lombardi, I mean, but really more probably guys like Landry, Shula, Halas certainly were guys that kind of fit that footprint. And I think it's because you understand the business, you understand what it takes to lead players, you understand what it takes to lead coaches. And when you come from outside of this, when you come from a business standpoint, oftentimes I think that you don't really understand how to separate what team, you know, what players or coaches or people in the industry are telling you from what you know best. And there's got to be a balance there where maybe you have something of value to bring to the table that's outside of what the NFL normally does, but they come in and they meet up with these, you know, veterans who've been there for years and years, telling them, look, you don't understand what goes on around here. You need to figure out what this is all about before you come in here and tell us what you want to do. Because the NFL has a very insulated mentality because they've been a monopoly for this long that, you know, they make money pretty much no matter what, or they share the money to a certain extent, that there's no one really pays for the mistakes that they make from an industry standpoint. It's not like there's another league that can draft day mistakes, their free agency or contract mistakes or what they do, and make them pay for it by, you know, taking away their audience. So, you know, the NFL is so insulated in that regard that they don't want anyone telling them how to change their process, or unless they actually have a lot of experience in the league already and have been, quote unquote, one of them. And even then, it's difficult to do because the response is much like bureaucracies in government or in universities where they say, well, we've always done it this way and it's always worked. But it's always worked because, in essence, you're kind of got this corporate welfare thing going on.
It kind of reminds me of this story with Dan Snyder. You were talking about like having industry experience in football. When defensive coordinator Mike Nolan, who was doing an all right job, had bland play calling. There weren't too many exotic blitzes. It was very, fundamental football. Dan Snyder, obviously he went over his coach, as he does, and directly talked to Mike Nolan and said that he called his play calling too vanilla, and he left a gallon of ice cream on Nolan's desk. And Nolan, he didn't do anything about it. And later in the season, a couple weeks later, Dan Snyder sent more ice cream, this time 3 5-gallon drums, with a note, "I wasn't joking, I do not like vanilla." Like, that kind of interference from an owner who doesn't know anything about football, that has to be frustrating for a coach.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, he looks kind of like Steve Carell anyway. I mean, it might as well be like The Office. I mean, it's just kind of like, I'm sure they probably, after they got fired or Nolan got fired and had a little bit of time off, and his wife or kids were watching The Office one night, he probably turned and looked and got a little scared when he saw Steve Carell up there on the screen, and goes, wow, that's just like my old boss. I mean, this is the kind of behavior, though, that's not uncommon to anybody's daily work. I mean, we see this kind of stuff happen all the time where people do not know how to manage because, you can learn certain skills, but management is something that's taught as a theory or subject and maybe at a business school, but not everyone goes to business school. And learning how to lead and manage it is a craft that takes a lot of time and takes some mistakes that you make. And you can succeed in a certain way if you've come from money, or if you had one method that maybe you landed in the right place at the right time and had the chance to be a hard charging, ball busting kind of leader who, didn't know how to work with people well. And these little ploys they got away with. And so, this is the type of thing also that's just a classic form of micromanagement. Daniel Snyder doesn't know about football compared to his coaches, and it shows that he doesn't trust his coaches. So if you're going to be an owner and you're going to hire people to do their job, let them do their job. And give them some time to develop that job, to develop what they're going to do, and have some patience with what they do. But the NFL isn't about that right now, because you have a lot of owners who they look around and it's kind of like that envious neighbor syndrome, where they see, well, one quarterback, the quarterback in this division, he was drafted as a rookie and played right away, and now they're in the playoffs, and I want a rookie who I can start right away, even though that may not be the best choice to make.
Right. So, and that might not be like the best place for your team to be, and, a million other factors.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about Bud Adams when he was with the Titans, when they moved the Titans. And, the classic story is that Jeff Fisher wanted Jay Cutler, that
right.
Norm Chow wanted
Leonard, yeah.
Yeah, and then you have Bud Adams, who wanted to flip the bird at all his Houston former
right.
business people and get Vince Young, who could have been good, yes, at some point. But I mean, this is the type of thing when you overrule decisions that your team has gone through a process to scout, and you overrule those decisions. You create chaos, and you have to trust your team, and your staff to do their job and let them go about it. But the NFL is kind of run by these little, 30 kings, and some of them are good enough at being able to let their court do what they're supposed to do. But other ones are kind of like what you think a king to be, which is kind of these oafs who sit up there and eat too much and bark orders for things that they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay, well, kind of reminds me of Jimmy Haslam. So we've kind of, I don't want to say danced around the issue, but we've touched on this issue a couple of times. We've talked about, training your scouts. We've talked about a little bit. You mentioned the turnover for scouts. You mentioned owner interference. You mentioned, not having a clear evaluation outcome in terms of like the number that we slap onto players. But and I know you've written about this before, and I think it's in your RSP. But if you could condense it by answering the question, you can run a front office. What changes, because you want to make a couple, what changes do you make to how front offices are typically run?
Sure. And probably the first thing I would make sure is that I would make sure that the owner knows that, if you start sending me ice cream and you start doing things like that, I'm gone. I don't need the money. I don't need to be here. And that's okay with me. You're hiring me for a reason. And I stated that very clearly in the interview. Because
you'd be like, you need to show me the faith that the 76ers showed Sam Hinkie.
Yeah, pretty much, and it would be the type of thing that you have to kind of go down that road, because what I would do probably to change things right away is how scouts are distributed and how they're trained. First of all, scout training varies from team to team, and it's not a lot. Generally they take a test. They don't always even know how they did on it. They just know that they were good enough to get hired. So what I would do is I'd keep all scouts in-house. I wouldn't assign them territories. Right now, think about this. The Western Territory of the United States is so much more vast than, say, the Northeastern Territory. You can fall down and hit 2 schools on the map in the Northeast compared to, what you'd have to do to hit 2 schools in the West by comparison. But each of these area scouts have these territories. They got to drive every day. They have to be accountable for, all classmen who are on the team, and they have to, fill out reports and study all these players and go to games and study the games up close, interview all the coaches. And these guys are consistently behind. That's why there's jokes that a lot of these scouts are also looking at draft magazines and paraphrasing information because they don't really have time, or they're asking their colleagues with other teams what they think of this, and they're covering their butts by giving 4th round grades to guys that they really like, but they're afraid that the teams think would be a reach, or giving 4th round grades to guys that they really don't like, but are afraid that the teams like them too much not to give them anything lower. So you get that whole evaluation prophecy of stick it between a 3 and a 5 unless the guys above you tell you to give them something low or something high. So I'd keep all guys in house right now, and I would make sure that guys are being hired for the long haul. And I would make sure that the director of scouting would be in charge of really, we'd have a program implemented. We'd make sure that we define the criteria that we have, much like I do with the RSP. You have defined criteria of what you're watching for at each position. I would have coaches actually, I'd have scouts actually geared towards position groups as opposed to regions. And they'd be responsible for watching.
So that's an interesting question, because I think it presents a unique logistical challenge for a lot of those scouts if you switch them from areas to position groups. And it's something that I very strongly agree with you on, but it does sort of raise the question, scouts do need to be on campus. They do need to conduct those interviews. Now, how much stock they put in those interviews, that's like another issue that, we may have with front offices.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's what I'm getting at here, is because you're absolutely right that you need to have someone on campus to interview and do all that, but you're not bringing the entry-level guy in to do that. That's what they're doing right now. It's either an entry-level guy or a mid-level guy. Instead, you should be watching the film and getting enough film study in there, and that everyone can agree upon, and you have a process rolling, and you're going to watch more tape this way. You're going to see more players that you need to see, and then you send someone out who has more of the experience, who can be more of a decision maker, who has a higher level of experience and responsibility in your organization. You send them out there to interview about
because the
players.
Reports that you get back about a specific player, they might not. The person who does the report might have all the context and might have an understanding of what they mean when they write something down. But when you transmit that information, a lot of that context can get lost. So something that seems like a minor flaw can get blown up into a major flaw, or something that would be a flaw doesn't get
And you can define all that and work on that, and you can have your coaches in-house during, at certain points where you can actually touch base with that and make sure the communication's great and everyone's learning and getting better. But at the same time, when it's time to actually find out about character, whether it's time to find out about, maturity issues or leadership or how they play in certain situations and talk to coaches. You already have enough information to draw upon at that point that you can trust, and then fly your guy out there and do that and have it be someone who you're actually going to listen to, as opposed to scouts who complain often about how that, very rarely do they really do anything but submit a report. And I've seen reports with teams, some of the better teams out there, and trust me, they're small. They're like a paragraph or two. I've seen a Russell Wilson scouting report that basically, if you read it, you would go, oh, this guy's a first-round pick, until you read the sentence that he was short, and therefore he needed to be more of a guy that you would reserve for as a backup, who could maybe be a really good backup one day. But there was nothing about the report and the content in the report that actually even said it, that would give you any impression that he was anything less than a future starter.
Yeah, that sounds like something that probably needs to be addressed by NFL teams. Another thing that seems to be coming up, and it looks like teams have been doing a lot better job of it. I know the Vikings do this, the Seahawks do this, and the Packers to some extent do this. They have their coaches train their scouts on what they're looking for. And I think that combined with knowing that you want your board to be small on draft day, do you think that, because there are a lot of teams that have positional cutoffs, and that's fine for them and it works for them, like height and weight and arm length and stuff like that. Do you think that you could refine the scouting process by making your board smaller as a result of some of these positional cutoffs earlier in the process, and make scouts a little bit more efficient at figuring out who they want to talk to and how they want to talk to them, and who they should do more tape on?
I think eventually, yes, because the whole approach that I would want to take is that you hired the coaches for a reason, you hired the general manager for a reason, and you have your director of scouting for a reason, and you're going to go through some rough periods initially, because unlike other NFL teams, we're not going to do this by accident and be successful by accident. We're going to do this methodically, and that may mean 3, 5, 7 years down the line here, we're putting these things in place, and we're going to have lessons to learn that may be tough. But yes, eventually what would happen is that you would have your coaches in line. Your coaches would be doing a lot of the explanation of what they expect for their scheme, and that allows you to be able to figure out as a group where your cutoffs are, what you're looking for from players. That's what the Ravens have always been good have been pretty good at this, of being able to say, this is what we want in general from a player, and if they don't have this, don't bother. And I think that, certainly Rick Spielman with the Vikings, I think that he's probably one of the sharper guys out there in terms of being able to combine a variety of elements and be willing to learn from the outside and use that along with his football experience from the inside to try and come up with solutions. And it'll be interesting to see how that continues to grow for the Vikings. But I do believe that, if I had that type of an opportunity, which is never going to happen, but if I did, that would be something that, in a perfect world, that's how I'd go about it.
Okay, let's switch tacks really sharply, because we went down one road that you brought up when you were talking about your history, like in process management and stuff like that. But another thing that I want to bring up is music. It features really, really strongly in a lot of what you do. Sometimes it's just in your reads, listen, views pieces, which are not football oriented. You always got some jazz playing when you do your boiler room stuff. And often you'll compare players to musicians. So it seems like it's a big part of your life. What to you connects music and football?
I think that's just kind of more where I came from, because before I got into the career I was at, I first became I was a music student for a long time growing up, and then I ended up studying jazz for a couple of years at the University of Miami back in the late 1980s. And I wanted to be a jazz musician, and I played some gigs in the Miami area a little bit. And then ultimately decided that probably the talent level that I had wasn't at the level where I was going to be doing the types of things I wanted to be doing. and I didn't really love the grind of practicing at the level that I was doing it at. But music has always stayed with me, and it was such a big learning experience that I often saw. I guess I've always seen, when I've watched football, it's a lot. There's a lot of similarities to that and the music that I enjoy a lot, because there's both structure to football, and then there's also a lot of improvisation based on a certain structure to the game, and I can relate that to my experience as a young developing jazz musician, and what I was learning in school, and there's also the performance aspect to it, which is very similar to music. Both are performance mediums. Both require a certain level of practice, but even with that practice on very structured things with technique, you also have times where you have to create in a way that you're improvising off of it, like I said. And there's also the team dynamic with it when you're playing with other people and responding to, dealing with rapport and how you communicate and rhythm and phrasing. And these are all things that you can kind of look at positions and see how those things meet up. And I've just found it an easy thing to be able to explain, and people continue to respond to it in a positive way and find it worthwhile. Because if they didn't, I'd have to stop doing it because it wasn't translated.
Fair enough. Jazz is a pretty uniquely improvisational music style, and in that way it has its own challenges. But do you think that your particular affinity with jazz is also a reason that you seem to favor improvisational quarterbacks more than most people seem to? Like Favre is in your top 3. You just tweeted that out of all-time quarterbacks. He's on your Team to Defend the Planet, a great piece that'll link in the show notes. You had this wonderful piece on Manziel, which, unfortunately we'll never get to see it play out based on what's happening in Manziel's personal life. But, quarterbacks that have excellent improvisational skills are ones that you seem to highlight or value, or even maybe not even value, just enjoy a lot. Do you think that's maybe connected a little bit to jazz?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is, because I think I appreciate, the thing about improvisation is that, a lot of people who may not listen to jazz, and I certainly understand that it's a very small percentage of people who actually listen to the medium. But what they think is something that they see off the Flintstones, which is somebody just playing stuff that makes no sense whatsoever, except to the people who seem to be doing it, and they're probably just faking it. You're trying to sound like they're being cool, So, and I understand that, I've played lots of other types of music too. Some of my gigs involved Earth, Wind, and Fire bands and salsa and merengue and all sorts of different stuff. But and I like all kinds of music, I like AC/DC or Van Halen as much as people my age did back then, and all that kind of stuff. But the thing about jazz is that there's always a structure there. All you're doing is reinventing melody based off the harmony that exists there, and then sometimes you're even reinventing the harmony a little bit if you have enough rapport with the teams around you. So I've always learned to appreciate how, that inside-outside structure based on my love for that music, and I identify with that when I see players. And I think I like improvisational players a little bit more because they don't crawl into a shell when their game plan, when the game plan gets blown to smithereens. They can still create and do something when the defense says, we're going to take this all away from you. And you don't have to have, it's the type of thing that can frustrate a defense because they feel like they've done something perfect and you still beat them. And that's why I liked players like Favre. That's why I like Jameis Winston in terms of his talent level and what he's capable of doing at times. It's also why I liked Manziel on the field and felt like, if he had a chance to grow and if he had a chance to if he was a more mature human being, he had that ability to do it at a level where I think that he could have grown more comfortable within his his boundaries and become a good NFL player if he had the maturity to do so.
So a lot of times, I mean, you've got you throw up reads, listens, views every so often. It's just stuff that interests you. We've talked a lot about music and how it relates to football, but you have a strong belief that good NFL evaluators have a broad set of interests. So where does that come from, and why do you think that's true?
Well, I think it's important because you have to be able to make connections to a variety of disparate elements, and it's just like good football players didn't all just play football and focus only on football. They played a variety of sports, and they were able to draw from those variety of skills to become better at the game. And so I think that good NFL evaluators are able to see things at a level where they understand human nature a little bit better. They understand what it means to, be challenged in ways on and off in and outside their job. There's a certain level of maturity, a certain knowledge base that they can draw upon. And it's not just, we always did X, we always did Y, because when you want evaluators who think and who question and who can draw upon, life experience to be able to also, sympathize with players and where they're coming from, because you don't want them overly sympathetic to the point where they're taking chances on guys that they shouldn't, but they also need to be able to understand what the typical track of maturity is for an adult, for a young adult. They need to be able to understand what type of dangers there are with, certain types of decisions to go too easy or too strict with how you judge or evaluate people. And you only get a chance to really read people and understand people when you have a broad set of experiences to be around them. And I think that if you're confined to a car all the time, only talking with football people, that does kind of probably dull you somewhat, unless you've had those experiences for a good 10, 15, 20 years before you got into the gig. So it's the type of thing too that I think that if you kept scouts in house, they'd have a little bit more of a life too, probably outside of it, because they're not traveling all that time, and they can still get in an efficient number of hours for you, more efficient than what they're doing now, which is going out to bars and drinking in between, traveling hundreds of miles and filling out reports, because that's life is tough. It's tough for scouts, and there are a lot of great scouts out there. It's just, to me, the process could make them even better.
Yeah, fair enough. When we talk about like a broad set of experiences, usually that means experiencing life, but sometimes that can mean connecting to a bunch of different people with a bunch of different backgrounds, which is, really important in terms of, writing a show, putting together a front office and stuff like that. Do you think the fact that, a lot of front offices tend to, and sometimes it's just they have to deal with so many applicants, but they tend to draw from a very narrow background in terms of their hiring process. Do you think that hurts the front office quality in a pretty significant way?
Yeah, I think it does, because it just becomes a club where everyone's slapping each other on the back, talking about how it's the same way all the time. And the great thing about inclusivity and diversity, in terms of diversity of backgrounds, and I'm not just talking about EEOC type of stuff, but I'm talking about just backgrounds in terms of where you came from, is that it really does allow a good exchange of ideas, but it requires great leadership to be able to bring it all together, so that you have a clear vision of how to use all of that information. And I think that that's what's lacking a lot of times in the NFL. But it's, right now this is how we do things. And the whole "this is how we do things, and it's always been how we do things" approach does create a more narrow thing, because like attracts like in that regard. If you're saying that you don't think anyone outside of the NFL understands you, then what you've done is you've created this sieve that you're shoving applicants through, and only the ones who are narrow enough to meet your very narrow standard of of what you're looking for, which is, guys who know football, but fit your kind of fraternity of what you're looking for, who won't rock the boat, who know when to keep their mouth shut, but then are also smart guys in terms of like maybe what you see as intelligent, which might again be very limited. You end up in a situation where you have a lot of guys who are kind of, just like you. And that's not really going to give you the best opportunities to explore things from all sides, especially if you're only encouraging people to speak up on maybe one player every once in a while. And it's got to be in the third, fourth, fifth round, not in the first or second round, or even in a room, beforehand. Again, it's about you being it's that model of Daniel Snyder now being Daniel Snyder like as a GM, and Daniel Snyder like as the director of scouting. And now it's like, why are these guys even here other than to give you paperwork that you're going to look at and say, well, do they agree with me, or am I going to override them?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Well,
it actually kind of reminds me of...
I got a question here.
Sure.
It's easy to pick on Dan Snyder, and I literally never thought I would ever say anything like that in my entire life. But it's easy to pick on Dan Snyder because, I'm serious. The only people he seems to hate more than his team are his fans. And yet he still has both a team and the team has fans. So I think, too, that teams are starting to incorporate some of the, analysis and the amazing work that the kind of like football media and analysis community has started to do. Like, even if they're doing so clandestinely, they're still like starting to buy the data and parse it and use it and that sort of thing. So my question is, do you think that there is kind of, is the door opening for kind of a receptive attitude as opposed to like a self-reinforcing attitude, or are we still a ways off from that?
Well, if you listen to the organizations that are selling the info, it's opening. The doors are opening, and of
Pro
course,
Football Focus has relationships with 22 teams or something like that, and they're very proud of how things are opening up. That's a good point.
Sure.
Organizations selling the info are very, very proud of this idea.
They are, and as someone who has spent 10 years in PR, it's a classic PR sales approach, and it was something that you would definitely use. Doesn't mean they're not doing a good job with what they're doing. It's just that I can tell you that I do have the privilege of having a relationship with someone who works with probably 8 or 9 different teams in the league, who does analytics, who has been in scouting, and the take that I hear often is that teams are somewhat receptive to it, but it's still a very, very early stage, and there's still a prevalent attitude of we've always done it this way, and you can't tell me, they're still, you still need the top down to buy into it and understand it. So until the Al Davis of analytics comes along, just like the Al Davis of, when Al Davis was in, the 50s and 60s and learned under the great coach with the Chargers back in the day. I'm trying to remember his name. I can't remember. He's Norv Turner's,
Don Coryell.
Not Coryell. The
Sid
guy
Gilman.
before that.
Sid
That's
Gilman?
right, Sid Gilman. Yeah. He learned from Gilman and then took his own. And then, he knew what he wanted from his teams and his offenses. And he figured out, I can go to, historical black colleges and get some great athletes at a pool where no one's looking. And I can have the advantage here. And he did that. The Steelers ended up doing that too, to an extent. So, but this was from guys who, were able to kind of synthesize things together. But you're going to need someone who has the expertise in analytics, but also the football acumen to end up taking on a role where he can really implement and lead from the top down, instead of trying to push these ideas up to the GM or push it up to the owner. You need a guy who's either owner, GM, and understands all this stuff and is a part of it, or you need a GM who the owner's like, look, I'm old I'm okay with this, happening. I just want to sit up there and I want to see a winner, but I'm patient because I know that things aren't built overnight. And, I'll handle the heat from how bad our team is if we stink for the next, 5 to 6 years, as long as I can get a sense that we are heading in the right direction in terms of internally. And if you get a guy like that who can like really drive it from the top down, that's when I think analytics will really take root.
So twice now you've mentioned, just in the last 10 minutes, the importance of really strong leadership. That kind of reminds me of something that actually happened at Grantland. So we were talking about, having a diversity of experiences and having people readily available to you that you can talk, that give you, context for players or context for situations. And I remember at Grantland, they published the story about a person who had invented a golf club of questionable effectiveness, and the story was initially lauded as something that was extremely well written, but the main character of the story was a trans person, and the way that they wrote the story was very upsetting to many people in the trans community, and for a lot of very good reasons. And some people were like, well, ESPN, if they had diversity in hiring, they would have avoided this. And it's true, they could have had a lot more people available to them that would have been able to vet the process, but they did have trans people on staff. They had people who were connected to the trans community on staff, and they simply never ran it through them. Like Christina Carl, trans baseball writer for ESPN, foundational, groundbreaking. They had access to her, and they never thought to run the story by her. And, a lot of times it seems like it comes down to that. It's not enough that you have, people, with a diversity of experience. Isn't it? It doesn't always have to be, EEOC, like you said. It could be as simple as having someone from North Dakota and someone from Florida on staff. Like if you want both of them, because you're going to get, experiences, situations that both of them are going to relate to differently. But it's not enough that you have those people on staff. It's really important that you develop the kind of leadership that allows you to connect those people together, get them in a room to work together, and have a process where things that might come up that they could have expertise on, run through them. And do you think that, and the same thing sort of with, analytics, you can have an analytics department. The owner can, and the GM can make sure that you invest in an analytics department. But if the leader, if the GM doesn't really have a process for integrating that into what they do, or if the owner doesn't have the GM, facilitate communication between, them and the analytics department, it seems like that's not going to be much use. Do you think that a lot of what's, I don't want to say holding the NFL back, but do you think a lot of what, we talk about when we talk about these changes at the NFL level, do you think a lot of that's just in place and maybe there's not the right kind of leadership for a lot of these teams for them to take advantage of it? Or do you think that we need the whole thing? We need, a lot more diversity. We need a lot more buy-in to analytics, and we need leaders willing to take advantage of them.
I think first you got to come down to having a leader who understands enough about the situation, understands enough about these things to be able to not get in the way of it, or to be willing to learn, and truly being willing to learn. But again, it really does come down to ownership. Is ownership willing to commit long term? Is the GM willing to spend the time to really learn these particular things and not override everything, and actually trust the process a little bit more? And if there's enough, I would say that you have to have people who are highly motivated and competitive and willing to work very hard, who aren't going to get complacent because they know that their jobs aren't on the line after 2 or 3 years, but at the same time, are willing to be patient with the process and have that perspective. But so there's some of that that's involved. Another part is, we can talk about diversity, but I think it's just like anything else in in terms of outside of football. Diversity is where, I think a lot of businesses say, well, diversity is so important, or they talk about diversity, but it's really inclusiveness that's more important. It's about creating inclusivity programs. AT&T is supposedly has one of the best diversity programs, because there are diversity and inclusivity They're a diverse and inclusive program, and it's about really bringing people together and recognizing differences. It's not about making everybody, be the same. It's about recognizing differences in a healthy and productive fashion and using those differences in a positive way. And it comes down to, again, process and buy-in and inclusivity with the people who need to be a part of that process.
So, the diversity of experiences is a big part of, I guess, the theme of the second half of this podcast. But, one thing that does give us a diversity of experiences in terms of, football evaluation, I think, is your RSP film room. It's kind of unique in terms of, what it provides to the football community. And you bring in different analysts with different backgrounds. Some of them are former scouts, some of them are former players, some of them have just been analyzing football for like 20-odd years. And you bring in a bunch of different people to look at a bunch of different players, and they all have a different understanding of like what those players can do or what we need to look for in players. How did that start? And what are your favorite, like 2 or 3 videos from that process?
Yeah, I mean, it started because I just wanted to get to know people in the community, and and then once a year I get to talk about it with a bunch of people for a month or two, and then it's back to the film room and writing about things when it comes to football. And I just thought there were so many good people out on Twitter that I could learn different things from, and I wanted to expand my knowledge base because I started writing at Football Outsiders back in 2012. And one of the things that they asked me to do was watch more tape and evaluate players beyond the skill positions. And so I thought this would be kind of a cool idea for me to get to know other people in the industry, to learn things from them, and to learn a little bit more about the other positions, and kind of get some shortcut to lessons that I could learn. So that's kind of how it started. It was kind of more of a network educational thing for me that I didn't think many people would really watch other than me and the person who was on the show.
Are you serious?
I mean, I thought we'd have it's true. I mean, I just thought, this was something interesting to me. And, an hour of watching film, I thought, who's going to watch this?
Boring.
That's what I figured. And then next thing you know, I had 1,000 followers within like the first 6 to 7 months, and people were commenting and liking it. And I just thought, well, there you go. That's cool. And so, and then I started doing shorter film rooms this year because I had an equal number of people who were like, I really love this idea, but there's no way in hell I'm watching this much tape, and I don't have the time to do that, even if I wanted to. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. And Brett Coleman over at the Battle Red blog, I do need to credit him. I believe he's an associate producer or production guy at NFL
he worked
Network.
well on Path to the Draft, I think.
Yes. And he did his own film rooms before I did. And they're just fantastic. They're excellent editing and got the music, and he does them extremely well. And I thought I'm gonna borrow or steal some of that idea from him. And I try to credit him on Twitter when I get the chance, because people suggested I take a look at what he did. And I started making 5 to 10 minute boiler room episodes that were a little bit more produced this year. And it seems like people really like those as well. And I'll continue to doing kind of a little bit of both, the talk show format and the boiler room format. And the talk show format, I mean, guys, some of my favorite videos, obviously Lance Zierlein came on and we did Brandon Scherf, and his was like a clinic.
I think my favorite one is the one with Zierlein and Scherf.
Yeah, it was just before he came on the NFL Network, and he was it was gracious with his time, and obviously his dad being an offensive line coach, and Lance knowing as much as he does, he put on a nice clinic. All I had to do was really ask questions, so it was terrific. Ryan Riddle and I have a good rapport, so Ryan's a good friend of mine, and we've become good friends, and the fact that he has that. He thinks differently, and I like how he thinks about things because he challenges a lot of stuff. And he was a defensive end at Cal who was a sack
set
leader.
Some records there. Yeah. Sack
leader. He was Yes, exactly. Seasoned sack leader during the Marshawn Lynch, Aaron Rodgers era. And let me tell you, I saw his tape, and I'm probably biased because I'm his friend, okay? But I saw his tape, saw his college tape, and I'm telling you, he would be a lot better than some of the defensive ends that are near the top of this draft class.
But he's too small, right?
No, man, he was good. He'd be fine.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, he was a smart player. He was a very creative, smart player who had a number of different types of moves. So watching him talk about players, he likes the metrics, but he also is someone that,
which I think is kind of actually unique among former players, which I like.
Exactly.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. His site draft metric, I recommend you go to, and then you just see that. But he also isn't a guy that's going to load you down with jargon. Like we talk about that, and he says, he says personally that it's like he gets bored. He appreciates that people understand all that stuff because like I had to learn all that stuff and I know all that stuff, but whatever. I want to know beyond that, and I want to talk about things and beyond that. So he's fun to have on. Eric Stoner, who's written for me in the past. He's always very insightful about the players that he watches. So, I've enjoyed doing shows with him. And I enjoyed watching Brett Hundley with him a year or two ago. We did a couple of shows with him, watching him there. So, I mean, those are some of my favorites that I can recommend. And then I'll add Will Hewlett. Will Hewlett is a quarterback consultant with several college football teams and some pro teams, and he has his own training area called The Range out in California, and he just it's been an honor to be able to have him on the show because he's just followed some of the work that I did and said, hey, I think the way you look at quarterbacks makes sense. I really dig these. And I said, would you ever want to come on and do these shows? He's like, oh yeah, anytime you want. So I try not to get too intrusive of his time, but at least once or twice a year, I try and bring him on.
That's awesome. I think so. I'll probably link some of those in the show notes. I also really like the most recent one. I think it's the most recent one with Justice and Tyrone Holmes. I think Justice does a really good job combining his discussion of metrics along with. I mean, he's people think about Justice as a stats guy. He's a high school football coach too, with his understanding of the way that pass rushers work. That's a really good one. And then also, I just really liked. Yeah, it's great, and we'll link it. Then I also want to bring up Eric Stoner and two of his videos. One on Eric Kendricks, which is really informative for me about how to evaluate linebackers, and then one also of interest to Vikings fans. I guess Stoner keeps on previewing Vikings. The TJ Clemmings piece that he has, which is not a film room, but it's a piece that he wrote that I've linked to at least 4 or 5 times in show notes around here. But I'm going to bring that up again. Those are all great. I think now we want to move on to – no, actually, before we go to the mailbag, and I'll let Dusty take over when we do that, one thing that I really like about the rookie scouting portfolio that you sell is that seeds go to Darkness to Light. Could you talk about that a little bit? Why that one, and how that came to be?
Yeah. Darkness to Light is an organization that is really devoted to providing funding and training to individuals, civic organizations, companies, you name it, to help them prevent sexual abuse in communities and also learn how to properly address sexual abuse when it happens. They are I think their training methods is the only one that has a true educational scientific study that shows that it's effective. And so, that was one of the reasons why. So you vetted a charity for its process.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So I did that. And certainly I have, I have met people in my life who have been affected by sexual abuse. And I've seen the challenges that they've faced as a result of that. And then I think it all kind of came to a head when the Penn State crime, basically what happened with Jerry Sandusky and Paterno and the Penn State organization, basically what happened, how it was handled. And I thought that as a community of people who love the game of football, I thought it would be a good opportunity for people to be able to do something they like, which was read about NFL, draft prospects, and at the same time know that some of that money, 10% of each sale, goes towards an organization that actually has worked with Penn State since that time. And I just thought it would be a good way to say, hey, as people who are involved in football, we do care. There are many of us who aren't just going to have a knee-jerk reaction to this in the wrong way, and understand that, this is a very serious issue, and we need to find ways to approach it in a way where, organizations don't bungle it and cause even more pain and suffering upon victims.
Well, thank you so much for doing that, because the RSP is so popular. It means a lot that some of it goes back to enriching lives. There are a couple of mailbag questions we want to get to before we let you go, just because it's interesting to get an outsider's perspective, and I'll let Dusty take over from there.
Yeah, it's a rare opportunity, but we won't waste too much more of your time. Augie Zera at August Zera on Twitter, August_Zera. Is the UCLA trifecta going to happen? And will Miles Jack fall far enough, I assume, for the Vikings to pick him up at 23?
Man, it would be unbelievable if they could do that. But if that would happen, but I don't think Jack's going to fall that far. But if he does, yeah, I have no doubts that Minnesota would take the chance on him at this stage, because I don't think the knee injury is bad enough that a team in the second half of the first round is going to pass him up. He might be the best player in this draft class.
All right. Let's see. J Tweedy at Joe Tweedy. Tweed is in like tweed jacket. That's great. Can Teddy make the leap with Adrian Peterson in the backfield? Given Bridgewater's key to our future, would you look to trade number 28?
If NFL was a run-oriented league like it was back in the day when Eric Dickerson was was one of the top backs around, then maybe at this stage of Peterson's career or a year or two ago, maybe it would have made sense to do that. But the league doesn't really value running backs on that same level. And while I think that still some of the best teams run the football, and you can look at previous Super Bowl participants and see teams, like the 49ers with Gore and Ray Rice with the Ravens and Marshawn Lynch twice. And, and you look at even the Broncos last year wanted to run the ball. That was really what they were trying to do. So when you look at that, certainly there's still, it still makes a big difference. And to me, Adrian Peterson needs to be a Viking for life. And the reason being is that you're not going to get the value out of him that you would expect, even as good as he is. And maybe he's a genetic freak of nature where he will get to play long enough that Bridgewater can develop and it will work out, even in where they can maybe be in a Super Bowl together. But I would say even if they don't, the fact that Adrian Peterson provides that balance in the running game is only going to help Bridgewater down the line. It's just a matter of whether the changes that have been made along the offensive line, getting Alex Boone and being able to get healthy players back, is going to be able to make a difference so that he has time to throw. And if he has time to throw, I think that he's going to be fine.
So you're up on Bridgewater.
I am. Absolutely. Right. Always been.
And finally, Ojibwe Pun at Guy Battis on Twitter writes in, if you are not allowed to draft a wide receiver in the first round, what's your draft plan?
Yeah, that's a great question because obviously, I mean, to me, I guess my first plan would be is who do I have to kidnap who was telling me that I couldn't draft Laquan Treadwell or Josh Doxson, before I could, before that decision became final. But if that didn't work out and I actually had to play by the rules, then there are a number of options that I would consider. Obviously, some people think offensive line might be a good idea, but I think that they're probably giving some of the players that they already have one more chance, and like Matt Khalil, they already shored up, guard. And I don't know if I want to draft a left guard in the first round where I think that I may be able to still get some, another guard available a little bit later who can help out. So then the option goes, how about linebacker? Linebacker would certainly be on my list as a weak side linebacker. If I had assurances, and I talked to my buddy, Dr. Gene Bramall, before the show and said, is there any shot that you would even consider Jalen Smith if he fell to the bottom half of the first round, or is that just a no-go absolutely? And he said, yeah, it's, third, fourth, fifth, probably that's even pushing it a little bit with what he's got going on. But that, which is too bad because, you look at how great of a player, great of a prospect he is. It would be so fun to be able to even take a red shirt on him and draft him as a first round guy that you just sit a year and wait and have him as that linebacker that you'd want to be able to fill in. So then you're hoping that maybe Darren Lee falls into your lap, but Darren Lee also has a lot of missed tackles. I'm not sure how Mike Zimmer feels about that. In terms of what he's looking for out of a linebacker, I'm not sure a guy who misses a lot of tackles, even if he's a quick, fast guy, is really going to be a part of his game plan. So, when I start looking at all of that, then, first round, I start thinking, well, what's a position that A, you can develop over a little bit of time, B, you still have you could add a little bit more depth to it, and you always need them. And to me, that's cornerback. I know Xavier Rhodes has come on. Captain Munderland's kind of a feisty slot corner in a sense. Terrence Newman is your veteran, and Trey Waynes. Trey Waynes certainly what you as good of a prospect as he was out of Michigan State. He's still a second-year guy, and with injuries and depth, why don't I look at a guy like maybe Artie Burns out of Miami, who is a really good athlete, who, from what I'm hearing on all accounts, when he's locked in, I think the NFL.com said this, when he's locked in, he looks really good. Well, certainly from what I've seen, there you see the evidence of the physical ability to cover tight and make plays. He's a good tackler, and he's someone that he's had some, his mother died and he's assumed responsibility for the children, for his brothers and sisters. So there's a lot going on with him. But again, you're giving Trey Waynes another chance to take that starting job in year two. You give this kid a year to get acclimated in a new city, to get acclimated as what it's like to be in a pro situation, where he doesn't have to play every down necessarily, get his life together, get some things stable, and help him learn, and give him a year to learn, and you might end up with a really good option there. And certainly, having three really good cornerbacks in this division could be very helpful.
Well, that's definitely a little out of the box. I think a lot of people had kind of dismissed cornerback as a first round investment just because of Trey Waynes, but I know the Vikings know the value of having a lot of cornerbacks given the struggles they had with injuries between 2008 and 2010, and they ended up signing Benny Sapp off the street to end up starting. So I wouldn't necessarily rule it out, but it's
I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend. To me, it's like that's not my first choice. But because my first choice is kidnapping the guy telling me that I can't draft Laquan Treadwell and Josh Doxson. But if I had to go that route, I'm probably looking at linebacker and hoping someone falls that I feel good about, and Darren, Darren Lee isn't bad, but I do have concerns about that. And then you could also look at defensive end. Defensive end is another position where you look, having a rotation is good, and if Noah Spence falls, wouldn't be a bad option to consider with him. I certainly could see how that he wouldn't, he's projected by some teams to go, around 17, 18, 19 range. If he falls a little bit more, and because teams are worried about the whole ecstasy thing, he might not be a bad option for them. You might end up with really one of the most talented players at that position, which is kind of a weak position in this class, and you end up getting him, and you can put him in a rotation.
All right. I think that's all we wanted to get to, especially given some of our time constraints. Obviously, not all that we could get to with a guest as amazing as you, Matt. We'll probably have you on if you'll let us sometime later in the off season. I think this has been a pretty amazing show for you to be on. We were able to accomplish our goal and not talk that much about wide receivers. We've been doing that a lot in the last couple of episodes, so this is a good break. And we were able to talk, I think, more generally about football processes, and sort of your background. So I really enjoyed your appearance here. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well. Is there anything that you want to plug or anything that you wanted to mention or have as a parting shot before you go?
Not really, just other than just thank you guys for having me on, and I absolutely would love to come on again. And you can find my work at www.mattwaldmanrsp.com. Just go there, check it out, and you'll see if it's something worthwhile for you to continue looking at.
Take our word for it; it is totally worthwhile. The site is amazing. The rookie scouting portfolio itself is amazing and newly released for this year, I believe. And if you buy it, the money goes to an amazing cause.
Yeah, and you'll also get a free post-draft RSP that'll allow you to draft a little bit better in your fantasy league. So that's also worth looking to.
Absolutely. So it's a nice 2-for-1 deal in that regard. And if you go to footballguys.com, there's actually, or you just want to hit me up on Twitter, you can ask me about a free preview that I put out for Football Guys that you can download of the 2016 pre-draft version that comes out April 1st every year, and the 2015 post-draft, so you kind of get a chance to see what it's like.
Definitely do that. Thank you so much for being on the show, Matt. We'll talk about having you back later this summer. Excellent. Well, all right. I suppose it would be unfair to not lead off the rest of the mailbag with the question from our new associate producer, Andrew Fraser.
That's true.
At _ Sounder Till I Die. Sounder Till I Die, I believe is what that says. What is your color rush color preference?
Not?
Yeah, what is none? Is there an
so there's a league that I don't believe that has the Vikings in like their gold, so it's all gold with just the very occasional purple highlight. I don't think that's going to be the case. The Vikings already have all purples. Maybe that's the reason they won't, because they already have all purples. But I think I would prefer the all purples to any other group.
All purple is the only choice. Like,
yeah.
All black is a bit much, and not really like that. Like, that's an accent color, and all yellow is just not like, there should be no yellow uniforms. That's too much.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
The Daily Norseman, our finest blog patron, the finest SB Nation site on all the internets, writes in with a question: if Josh Doctson was a tree, what kind of tree would he be?
Well, I don't know a ton about trees, so I'm going to select the fir. They're old, like Josh Doctson. They're tall, like Josh Doctson. They're a little skinny for their height, like Josh Doctson. and they have phenomenal hands. No, that's not true. But I think that's maybe the closest comparison I could come up with.
That's good. I went with a similar comparison. I think he would be like an ash tree, because we have ash trees in the front yard of the house I grew up in Grand Forks, and they were planted like shortly before I was born, so about like 35 years ago, and they, like Josh Doxson, are older than most of the other plants in the neighborhood, and like sturdy but still slender, like trunk wise, and with really good like spread. Like they really cover the yard and offer a lot of good shade after all this time. So
I was a little bit worried because ash trees are more susceptible to like environmental threats than fir trees. So if he's more of an ash tree, then I think that means some injury proneness, which he did suffer from an injury at TCU. And who knows? Perhaps tree comparison has me thinking.
Perhaps more accurate than even I had intended. Brett Kreis writes in, Brett Kreis at Sergeant Awesome 1EA on Twitter writes in, does Manziel die of an overdose or a car wreck? And does it happen this year?
I think it happens next year, and my guess is an overdose. That's all I got, though. I don't really even have reasons for it. That just seems more appropriate to me. Do you know he had leftover cocaine? Do you remember that story like a couple days ago with the real estate agent?
I actually don't. This is there's more Johnny Manziel news.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, and maybe.
Well, I mean, I know Drew Rosenhaus fired him, but
yeah.
Anyway.
So he rented a vacation home near Los Angeles. Basically, it was the exact same time as the he is or isn't living with Von Miller, he is or isn't living with Josh Gordon stories. So you could imagine how it was buried. But he and his posse rented out a vacation home in L.A., and he left it in ruins. The real estate agent manages a bunch of rental vacation homes in the area and says his group will no longer rent to Manziel or his friend. But the thing that was most interesting is not that he trashed a home and caused serious property damage and violated the terms of his lease, but that there were leftover drugs, and particularly leftover cocaine at the party, which you have to be so used to having cocaine available to you for not that much relative to how much you can afford that you can even have leftover cocaine. And the ability to have leftover cocaine, I bet, translates to the likelihood of having an overdose.
Well, you know what they say. Cocaine is God's way.
No, I don't.
Well, I'm about to tell you. Cocaine is God's way of telling you that you have too much money.
It is. So, Johnny, I'm sure you can find a way to solve that problem. Please
Someone
don't.
at the party could have. But hey, what thing about cocaine is you can't take it with you.
You mean to heaven?
Well, to heaven, or
he could have actually packed up the extra cocaine and taken it with him, like in a very literal sense.
Well, I guess yes, heaven. All right. Alex Jury writes in with a few questions via email I rather enjoyed. If and when Trey Waynes makes a Pro Bowl, would Arif eat any amount of crow I sent him in the mail?
It probably has to be healthy, and I'm not going to de-feather it myself. So basically it has to be, and the question also includes
what if it was kept warm in a special Arif's hot takeout box?
If it was kept warm, I'd be a lot less likely to eat it. If it was in a refrigerated box for overnight shipping and it had been plucked, maybe I would eat that crow. And I would take pictures of it and talk about how this crow was specific to my Trey Waynes evaluation and stuff like that. Because I think my evaluation basically was just, he's not the kind of guy who would make a Pro Bowl. So him making a Pro Bowl would be a direct refutation of that evaluation. So that would be perfect. But I would eat it so long as it was properly. Because I'm not going to get food poisoning for having a bad take. But I will physically eat crow.
Would it have to be a free-range crow?
Do they farm crow?
With a permanent placement for the Yellerhorn in US Bank Stadium, it is my sincere hope that we can come up with something a little more awe-inspiring and a little less like a middle school arts and crafts project. Physical appearance aside, I think this would be a good opportunity to rework the horn sound effect itself. Less a horn of Gondor and more a horn of Helm Hammerhand.
Okay.
Do you support a different horn? I guess is the question.
I guess, yeah, I'm okay with it not being a horn of Gondor. I don't really mind the Geller horn, but like horn of Helm Hammerhand is not bad.
What about the inflatable Vikings ship?
If we could replace that with a wooden construction that could be wheeled in and out of the stadium, I would be way for that instead of the inflatable Vikings ship.
I would support that as well. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for...
No, we've got one more question from Iowa Josh.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, that's right. We initially had wanted to have Matt on to ask this, but regrettably we ran out of time. How does that happen? We're usually so concise.
It's so weird.
All right. Which offense? Iowa _Josh writes us, which offensive tackle will be on the board that's worth the number 23 pick?
For my money, probably not any offensive tackle. So the 4 offensive tackles that consistently ranked as the top 4 according to the consensus board research that I've been doing: Laramie Tunsil, Ronnie Stanley. Those are the 1 and 2 for basically every evaluator. And then people are debating between 3 and 4, between Jack Conklin at Michigan State and Taylor Decker at Ohio State. Personally, I prefer Taylor Decker out of the 2 of them, but most people seem to prefer Jack Conklin. Either way, those guys are fine additions, I think, for any offense that is particularly lacking in having an offensive tackle, needs a right tackle or a left tackle. But I think that if you're getting a guy that you want to develop for a year, or if you're sacrificing needs at wide receiver or linebacker, I think that they're not good enough for you to sacrifice the potential options you have at wide receiver or linebacker. Now, if all of the linebacker options are gone, all the wide receiver options are gone, and no one wants to trade up to your spot, then I would probably take either Decker or even Jason Spriggs, who is the consensus 5th offensive tackle. He could be a first-round talent. That would be kind of a reach, I think, for a lot of people. And if you're getting a developmental athlete like him, because I don't think his tape looks particularly great, but if you're getting a developmental athlete like him, you might as well wait around and grab Jermaine Ifedi, or wait even another round and grab Raven Clark. Just because, those are the guys that are – I mean, you're going to get a guy that's going to start in 2017 either way. So you might as well get a guy that you can get your offensive line coach on and develop. But – yeah, I suppose Taylor Decker, but I really think that that's not a great idea. That I think that in that situation, it's just a lot better to trade out of the pick. Linebacker options aren't just Darren Lee. You could get Leonard Floyd, who I think could be a great off-ball linebacker. He's listed as an edge prospect for most people. I think he's not as good an edge prospect, but he could be a great off-ball linebacker prospect. Other than that, I don't like the fact that I'm kind of locked into positions here, but I kind of feel like I want to be locked into either the wide receiver or the linebacker position. I would not be opposed to a safety pick. If the Vikings pick a safety that's like way off of the consensus board, that would be totally in line with how teams have been picking safeties the past couple of years, because safety evaluation is really, really difficult for a lot of evaluators, given the fact that most of them only have access to the broadcast tape. And don't have the ability to ask the coach sort of what the responsibility is for a safety on a particular play. So the evaluations can be widely different. So if they grab Carl Joseph, or I'm not a huge fan of Keanu Neal, or Darian Thompson, who he's got a wide range. So I'd be okay with any of those 3 positions. But I think offensive tackle, someone would have to fall pretty far for me to be that interested.
Well, there you go. Oh, one more question. James appears on Twitter to ask us a question.
Oh, thanks, James. Hi, James.
What's up, James? Thanks for working so hard on this episode. He asks us, assuming Manziel is done, which, who's the bigger draft bust, Manziel or Jamarcus Russell?
Jamarcus Russell, easily. I think Manziel's bust was more of a spectacle, in part because it happened in 2015, 2016, and in part because his story is just so much cooler than was lazy and liked purple drank. Like, Manziel's story is and it goes in completely different directions. It's nuts and it's unpredictable. Marcus Russell is just like whatever. But Russell's a bigger bust, not just because of the investment, but because actually the warning signs were actually probably stronger for Russell than they were for Manziel. And remember, the warning signs for Manziel include his dad before the draft calling Manziel an alcoholic. So that's a pretty big warning sign. But the warning signs for Jamarcus Russell were basically everyone in the league was calling Al Davis, including Matt Millen, the GM of the Lions at the time, who was terrible, calling Al Davis and saying, absolutely do not draft this person. He is lazy and he has substance problems. And basically the exact same things that happened to him. And a bunch of teams so did you ever see Draft Day, Dusty?
I did not.
So there's a scene in Draft Day where they talk about mailing out playbooks to all the quarterbacks, and one of the focuses of the movie is this untouchable quarterback prospect, Bo Callahan. He's basically Andrew Luck, except more handsome. And you know, the team has to basically figure out whether or not they really want to draft Bo Callahan and whether or not they need to because they've got this other quarterback on the roster they like, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things is that I think in the movie, the Redskins mailed out playbooks to everybody, and at the back of every playbook, there's a $100 bill taped to it. And you know, most prospects, you know, mentioned it or kept the $100 bill. The quarterback prospect that the Browns currently have on their staff actually was the only one to mail it back, so it's like very nice and kitschy. But Bo Callahan lied and said he read the playbook when he didn't, and didn't even know about the $100. And so that's supposed to be a red flag. Well, that's actually based off. So Bill Belichick actually did that exact same thing with the $100 bills. That's a real story. And one thing for Jamarcus Russell is that a bunch of teams, or at least one team, I shouldn't say a bunch of teams, one team sent him a DVD that was like, this is our game plan. Evaluate it. What do you think? And he responded with, I think this is a great game plan. I think it's going to work really well. I think I would be a great fit for it. And it was a blank DVD. So a lot of warning signs for Jamarcus Russell. But I think that, and then also, it was the number 1 overall pick versus like number 22. So Jamarcus Russell.
That's true. And Manziel was smart in that he didn't give himself enough time to accrue a passer rating of 50.
That's true. Manziel didn't have enough time to qualify for passer rating.
Well, burn bright, burn fast, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess. You'd rather be a shooting star than shitty bonfire. That's the comparison, right?
Well, all I can tell you is that I reached for the lowest star and I still got burned. Stars are very hot. No. All right, that I think is going to do it. We have no more secret mailbag questions.
Like surprises.
None have come in the taping of the show. So that's going to be a wrap for episode 129. Thank you so much to Matt Waldman for hanging out with us for a little while and giving us really good insight into process.
Yeah, I think it was a good shakeup from all the what do you think of this receiver stuff? Which I think, we've had guests do a really good job of that, Josh Norris, Matt Harmon, etc. But this is just a nice shift from that.
Yeah. It was fun. The insight into kind of the beliefs of ownership and micromanagement. It's true. Management itself is a career, and NFL ownership is a dalliance. I mean, it's
for a lot of teams, it's definitely a dalliance, or they're part of a club of rich people who want to one up each other. That Bud Adams story he told, I'd actually heard multiple times from different. So I think that's basically an accepted truth now that Norm Chow wanted Matt Leinart, which makes a lot of sense. He was Matt Leinart's offensive coordinator at USC. Jeff Fisher wanted Jay Cutler, who had the most amazing pro day in the history of pro days. And he was a first round pick, so it wasn't like it was only a pro day or anything like that. But he was much more prototypical in terms of a quarterback mold. And Bud Adams had a bunch of friends in Texas, and he wanted to tell his friends in Texas that he got the Texas guy, Vince Young. So he told them to draft Vince Young, which I think is a part of the reason that Vince Young flamed out, because Jeff Fisher hated Vince Young. So yeah, no, the insight into the way owners work, that's super interesting, and I think it helps us understand some of the decisions that teams make, because sometimes they make no sense, and maybe that's actually not the front office's fault sometimes.
Well, and we never explicitly said it, but at least that's one thing we can credit to the Wilfs, is sort of staying out of the way. You never hear about them. I mean, leaving aside the Adrian Peterson situation, which was complicated and needed some untangling. Like, you never really hear about the Wilfs coming in and running the Vikings like a fiefdom.
Right, and I'm very happy about that.
Indeed. Check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/Daily Norseman. The Daily Norseman SB Nation blog is where all of our episodes are posted for the time being. Unless you subscribe to iTunes or Google Play Music or Stitcher or any other of a number of fine podcast aggregators, please do so you don't miss an episode, because they just keep getting better and better, I tell you. And this is supposed to be the boring time. This is the off season. Training camp is a mere 3 months away. Make sure you throw a few bucks at the show if you feel like we're doing something that is worth keeping around. PayPal.me/NorseCode or Patreon.com/NorseCode, whether you want to make a one-time or a recurring contribution. Until next week, this has been episode 129 of Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, and our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.